I came in from the flats with dust on my cuffs and the sun dragging its heel across the ridge. The town ahead looked like a word someone had started to say and then forgot. One main street, false fronts gray as chewed rope, a windmill turning slow as a prayer hand. A single lamp burned behind the smeared glass of a store window, warm as the inside of a biscuit, and the light laid a square of honey on the porch boards. I stopped because I was thirsty, and because it's hard to pass one brave light. The bell above the door gave a tired clack, same as a mule shaking off a fly. I could smell coffee, axle grease, old wood, honest, working smells that made the chest loosen a notch. Behind the counter, a woman in a plain blue dress was skimming chaff from a grain scale with the edge of her hand. Her hair was streaked with iron and wheat, braided up and pinned tight, and she nodded like I'd arrived right on time. "Evening," she said, eyes taking my measure the way you check a wagon tongue for cracks. "Evening," I said. "Saw your lamp." "Dusk expects it," she answered, and lifted the glass chimney with a practiced twist, turning the wick a whisper higher. The flame trimmed up, small and steady, like a vow spoken under your breath. I bought a paper of nails and a half peg of coffee, because a light like that ought to be honored with trade. She wrapped the coffee in a scrap of newspaper, the shipping page from a San Antonio sheet, and tied it off with cotton twine. When she looked up again, her face had the kind of lines you get from squinting into the weather and choosing to remain. "Lydia Pike," she said. "This is Pike's General, though I suppose the sign is more memory than fact." "Elias Finch," I said, giving the name I favored when I wanted my past to lie down and behave. I was looking for fence work and a place to bed my tools where rain couldn't find them. She nodded toward the back, where a kerosene stood near a broom with straw flared like a foxtail. "Most folks moved when the rail swung the other way," she said. "I open at first light and keep the lamp at dusk. It keeps the name of the town in God's ear." "What's the town called?" "Mender's Creek," she said, and the name felt right. I always liked places that tried to fix what the world wore down. She watched me glance at the empty street, then at the lamp again. "Some promises look foolish right up until they're not," she added, quiet as a quilt seam. Through the door glass I could see the streets lay. A blacksmith shed with a mouth dark as a cave, a livery, 2 houses with porches sunk on one side, the church steeple broken like a tooth. Wind ran its fingers through a yard of ragweed and rattled a tin sign where the paint still said tonic in a faded yellow. At the far end, the creek itself shone like a belt buckle under the first star. It was a hard little place, but it stood up straight. I asked about a room, and Lydia told me the loft above the store was empty if I didn't mind mice and a roof that argued with thunder. "I've had worse conversations," I said. She gave me a key on a strip of leather, shaped like the handle of a spoon, and I said I could work mornings for board until some ranch took me on. "We settle easy," she said. "I expect competence more than talk." The loft had a bedstead built from a door laid across 2 nail kegs. One window faced west, cloudy glass catching the last smear of orange. Dust motes rose and fell like lazy snow. I laid my roll at the foot and set my hammer and plane where I could reach them with my eyes closed. Below me, I could hear Lydia locking the till, the soft squeak of the lantern's thumb wheel, the hush of her turn. I slept light and woke with the kind of ache that comes from carrying what you haven't set down yet. By morning, the store was a bell of quiet industry. A man with hands like stove lids came in for salt and spoke 3 words to do it, all polite. A girl not yet 20 traded 2 eggs for a spool of black thread. The thread disappeared into her pocket like hope into a sleeve. Lydia moved through the place like she knew where to be before an item missed her. She pressed the coffee grinder with the heel of her hand, and the burr sang a steady tune like a cricket behind the stove. Each sail was a stitch, neither dramatic nor small. I swept the plank floor, scissoring the broom through grit and seeds, and felt the day earn itself. At noon, A lank sheriff with a badge that had lost its shine came in and leaned on the counter with 2 fingers. "Folks say you hired someone," he told Lydia. "I accepted help God sent," she replied. "No more heat than a kettle at a simmer." He turned his eyes to me, not unkind, just measuring. "You planning to move on?" he asked. "If there's nothing to do," I said. "If there is, I'll do it." "Name's Hob Avery," he said. "We got no jail worth the word and no one eager to fill it." He bought a twist of tobacco and left without chewing. That first evening, I held the ladder while Lydia wiped the soot from the lamp globe with a cloth she kept in a saucer. She turned the wick down, then up, listening to the flame the way a carpenter listens for the clean bite of a saw. Outside, creek frogs chirped, and the wind carried wood smoke from far off, blue-gray and thin. She set the globe back and stepped down, breath even, hands steady. "You light this every night?" I asked. "Every dusk," she said. "My husband said a town's heart beats where its lamp is honest." "What happened to him?" "Same thing that happens to all good men," she said. "Not sharp, just finished." We stood a spell, the 2 of us, in that square of honey light, looking out at the street like a stage waiting for its first line. A boy on a piebald pony rode by slowly, looking at the lamp and then away like it embarrassed him to be seen looking. The windmill turned and clicked and kept on. We turned the lantern. Morning brought a job. Jory Maddox, the blacksmith, wanted his side shed faced with new planks before the next norther tried to crawl inside his shop. He had forearms roped thick as a harness, and a laugh like a hammer on a rail. "Can pay in nails and iron and a little cash I coaxed from a plowman," he said, and I said yes, because a man lives on trade before he lives on coins. We pulled boards from an old ice house, and I shaved the splits clean with my plane, the curls falling like dry orange peels. Jory set the posts true with a mason's careful spite, because crooked invites weather closer. By noon the skeleton of the wall was up, and we ate biscuits stiff as cards, dipping them in coffee until they remembered their manners. Everything smelled of iron and sap. Back at the store, Lydia counted tins and made a list with a pencil that had been sharpened with a knife so long it was mostly splinters. "Oil's low," she said, tapping the kerosene's belly like a doctor. "That lamp matters," I said, surprised at the firmness in my voice. "It matters whether folks think they're seen," she answered. "That's all a lamp says, really." At dusk, we lit again. No one came, but 2 shadows crossed the street and paused, and then kept moving, not quite as slow. I felt the way a team feels when the load shifts just enough to make the road seem less steep. We turned the lantern. The 3rd evening, a man I'd noticed but not met, Reuben Hatch, slick hair and hungry eyes, stopped in to lean on the pickle barrel and call it visiting. "Oil's dear," he said, smiling without offering teeth. "Dearer every mile from the rail." "Not dearer than dark," Lydia said. Reuben clicked his tongue and said the land agent in Dustford was buying up lots for folks who understood progress. He asked me sideways where I'd come from and how long I aimed to stay. I let the questions pass like a weak creek. No need to reinforce a bank already holding. He told Lydia he could find her a buyer for the store, which he called a building on a fine corner, as if it had no history inside it. Lydia wiped the counter with her flat palm, the kind of motion that closes a ledger. "Probably a waste of oil," he said, nodding at the lantern. "Probably," Lydia agreed, which sounds like surrender until you know her. He left with a candy stick on credit he hadn't asked for, and she marked it down in the book because she kept faith, even with those who didn't. We turned the lantern. The next day, I carried a post-hole digger out to Avery's pasture to mend the fence where a heifer had learned the quick math of freedom. Sheriff Avery worked beside me, his badge more habit than threat, and he told me how the church roof came off in the wind and never quite went back on. "Folks left by dozens," he said. "Not all at once, like teeth." "It hurts slow that way," I said, and he nodded once, eyes on the horizon. When we came back through town, the lamp was already set on the counter, its wick trimmed, the glass shining with that particular clean that comes from human hands. Lydia watched the street the way you watch a kettle about to sigh. So long as you light it, I heard myself say, I'll be here to help. Then we'll have enough light for the work, she said, and that was the whole contract. That night, a chill came down from the north like a thought you don't want but must consider. I went up to the loft for my coat and found the mice had not increased in number. I counted that a kindness. On the stairs back down, I heard voices that belonged to Boots and Effort. Jory stood inside the door with a wrapped parcel, and the young seamstress, Ruth Ansell, beside him with a shy chin. Brought this, Jory said, setting a bracket on the counter, iron-shaped like a question mark grown brave. Figured the lamp ought to hang out where folks can't pretend they didn't see it. Ruth unfolded a length of ticking she'd hemmed on both sides, and it looked like a flag that had forgotten which war to choose, which meant it might be ready for a new one. Lydia's mouth softened, and that was the light before the light. We drilled 2 pilot holes and cinched the bracket tight to the post with lag screws as big as a child's thumb. I lifted the lantern off the counter, careful not to slosh, and hung it there like a star that had joined our side. The flame looked smaller outside, the way truth seems thin against a big dark, but it held. We turned the lantern. 2 boys came by with a hound whose ribs showed like a washboard. They didn't stop, but they did tip their heads, which is how boys say thank you when you haven't given them anything but a feeling. Across the way, a lace curtain lifted and settled. Someone had seen us pretend nothing was happening while doing something. By nightfall, the street didn't look so alone. Work drew me deeper. Lydia let me mend a row of shelves whose end caps had gone soft. I set a new strip of oak into the tongue and groove and planed it flush. The shavings were long and tight, like curled hair. In that slight sound of blade against wood, I could hear the day agreeing to the next. A quiet disruption came on a Thursday when clouds like unwashed wool bellied down and spat a hard, short rain. The wind slapped the lantern sideways and slammed the front window with grit that stung. I ran to shelter the flame with my hands, and Lydia steadied my elbow, her palm dry, calm. The light guttered and clawed back. Oil won't keep if we coddle it, she said, but nor will people. We waited for the wind to decide it had proved its point. When the rain passed, the street smelled like wet iron and cut grass, the 2 scents that make a town. We turned the lantern. The following morning, a wagon came through with a ginger-haired baker named Oscar Grunn, who'd gone to Dustford and found the street too new to trust. He sold us 2 loaves, for a price Lydia called generous in the bad way. Before he left, he asked, almost embarrassed, whether there was a hearth he could use if he came back with flour. Bring it, Lydia said. Heat hasn't forgotten the oven yet. Around the same time, the church's door swung open, and the teacher, Miss Alma Reeves, hat neat as a sentence, stepped out holding a slate and a rag. She'd been keeping her own counsel, teaching the 3 children still left like they were a class of 30. She stopped on the steps and looked down the street to the porch, the lamp. And the people gathered, not gathering, and her eyes warmed like paper catching fire. That night, Alma placed a tallow candle in the church window, poor cousin to kerosene but kin all the same. We kept setting wicks, and the town kept noticing in a way that doesn't admit to it. A man put his porch chair back where it had been. A woman swept her steps and hung a tin ladle on a nail so the handle caught the light. At the livery, old Betts raked out the straw and cursed at no one, which is how he greets a new day. We turned the lantern. News travels truer in the slow way. 2 hands from the North Range came by Saturday for cartridges and coffee and stood on the porch a beat longer than trade would require. They told us the Dustford land agent had a big talk about leveling Mender's Creek for a cattle road and making clean money from clean ground. Funny kind of clean that asks you to forget folks, Jory said, hammering a nail home without looking. Reuben Hatch came back with a document tube and a smile slick as bacon grease. He unrolled papers that had fancy lettering and a seal that shone like something meant to stop arguments. Lydia read the top line and the bottom and handed it back like a spoon too hot. "We don't transfer anything at dusk," she said. "It's when the lamp's busy." He laughed like a man humoring a superstition. Then he tasted the room and made it shorter. "You keep lighting that," he said to me, chin jutting at the lantern. "You'll encourage vagrants and thieves." "I have met thieves that prefer dark," I said, "and I've been a vagrant that remembered his manners." After he left, the store felt larger, which is strange until you remember fear is a poor carpenter and takes space for itself. I checked the kero again and saw the oil hanging low as an old dog's crowding ribs. "Tomorrow I ride to Dustford," I said. "I'll fetch what we need." "That's a dear trip," Lydia said. "I'll pay what's due." I told her I had a little tucked away, enough to start a habit of light. She looked at me with something like anger and something like gratitude, and both were honest. "We don't buy heroics here," she said. "We buy beans and oil and trust." "Then trust me to bring back oil," I said, and that settled it. The road to Dustford was baked clay and bad company. Wind shoved me in the back and then the chest, undecided which direction would best prove its point. I rode the store's old sorrel mare, who seemed to accept me the way a porch accepts boots, politely, without enthusiasm. When we reached town, the rails steamed and spat, and men yelled at nothing and everything. Inside the oilman's she, a sour little clerk tried to charge me twice the price for kero and pretended not to know Lydia's credit. I counted coins onto the counter, slow and steady, while he grew damp under the eyes. "Write our name right," I said. "Mender's Creek." I paid more than I liked, and less than I feared. By the time we made the creek bridge back home, the sky was the color of tin. I rolled the kegs down off the wagon bed and heard the hollow thump that means a thing will last a while if you mind it. Lydia's mouth bent again at the corners, a feeling trying not to show. We filled the tank like a throat. Dusk came up, and the wick took the flame easy as a hand finding a hand in the dark. I felt something loosen along my ribs, the place where a man keeps his measure of distance. We stood and watched the street not change, and secretly change. We turned the lantern. It's a simple thing, setting light. But simple things call other simple things, and that is their skill. 2 evenings late, our Betts the liveryman set a lantern on a hook by his stable, dirty globe, ash-black cap, light still honest. Jory hung a squat iron lamp inside his forge door, the flame fat and red like a coal remembering itself. Alma set 3 candles now, side by side like students ready to answer. Ruth put a little glass jar with a tea wick in her window, which looked humble as a yes. Sheriff Avery took a lamp from a shelf at Pike's and polished it until he could see old versions of himself in the brass. We turned the lanterns. That's when the test came, as tests do, quiet and sideways so you can pretend it isn't one. Late afternoon, a child went missing. Jed Sutter, age 6, soft boots, a cap with a blue button. He'd followed a piebald dog toward the flats and unspooled himself past where the ground remembers names. His mother came in white-lipped and said, "Jed, the way a nail says itself when a hammer misses." We ranged out in sober lines, not shouting, because you scare sound when you crowd it. The sun went down like it always does, not caring for our plan. I saw Lydia stand in the doorway, jaw set, and the lamp behind her making a halo that had nothing to do with saints and everything to do with habit. "Light," she said, and that was the order. One by one, lamps took. Porch by porch, hook by hook, window by window, points of flame like breadcrumbs for a child and his dog to follow home. Avery set men at the corners of streets with lamps held high, and the creek took their reflections and lined them up like soldiers. I took the north run with Alma, the 2 of us a sober pair, her skirt whispering, my boots calling answers to the dirt. We found the dog first, paws muddy, tail a metronome. He led us to a wash where moonlight pooled, and Jed was sitting with a stickboat in his hands, proud as a sailor. He'd followed water because it moved, and thought light would find him because it always had. We let out the breath the town had been holding, which is a sound like a barn door easing shut against the wind. Back in the street, people pretended to go about their business, which is how joy stays decent. Jed's mother folded him up, then put him down, and then folded him again because you have to. Avery cleared his throat like a mill starting and said, "Those lamps are good law." We turned the lantern. After that, evening light was no longer just Lydia's stubbornness. It became the way Mender's Creek said its name. Word went out on boot soles and wagon tongues. By nightfall, the town returned. Even travelers noticed. Oscar the baker came back with a sack of flour and a heartbeat for heat. The first morning his oven woke, the smell of bread stepped into the street like a man home from a long trail. People came in not for loaves, though they bought loaves, but for proof that yeast still had a place to lift. Oscar set 2 rolls on Lydia's counter every dusk without counting them, and she let him get away with it. Trade thickened modestly. A tinker came through and sold buttons that matched nothing yet matched everything. A widow from the flats brought jars of peach put up in syrup so sweet your teeth went quiet for a minute. Ruth stitched lamp sleeves from scraps, little collars to keep the wind from doing its meanness. All that light made the shadow honest, too. Reuben Hatch didn't like the way deeds talk got harder when folks stood under flame and remembered what names meant. He tried to set men whispering about taxes and the price of oil, about how light can draw moths and trouble both. But a town that shares bread and lamps for a lost child has a way of sorting which moths it will host. He came into Pike's with his smile and his paper one more time. "Oil won't last," he said. "What then?" Lydia pointed at the ledger. "We've got 12 families settled and 6 coming back on Sundays," she said. "Oil lasts when folks do." Reuben's eyes slid to me, then to the lamp, then to the street where Alma's candles and Jory's forge glow breathed together like 2 lungs. "You holding this on your back, stranger?" he asked me. "No," I said. "We carry it like a bucket between us, 1 hand each side so the water steadies." He rolled his paper, tapped it against his palm, and went out to where his horse refused to be impressed. We turned the lantern. You might be wondering where I put my living in all this, my want. A man can help a town and still be hungry for a room that knows his steps, and a voice that asks about his day without prying it open. That came slow, like water finding a low place. It wore the shape of June Pike, Lydia's niece, who arrived from a sister town with a tin trunk and a way of lifting a crate that said she'd done it before. June's hair was dark as a stove lid, and her hands were nicked in the polite way needles nick. She had a quiet that wasn't shyness. It was a working knowledge of what not to say. She set about restacking the bolt cloth and fixing the slot on the till that stuck when you were honest and slid when you weren't. I found myself planning shelves to suit the goods she made a place for. We didn't talk much at first because it was easy not to. I made a countertop from fir planks, and she ran her palm across it once and said, "True." That was more praise than I'd had in years. In the evenings, she wrapped the lamp cloth and handed it to Lydia before the careful wipe, and a small ritual grew, a family of 3 with work for hands. If you've been listening a while, ease your shoulders now and sip a little water. Even out on the Tri-L, we take a pull and stretch a bit. There's no good sense in cramping up over a story. Let your breath lengthen the way dusk lengthens a street. All right. One night, a coach arrived with 2 passengers and a driver who wore his scowl like a scarf against the bugs. They pulled up because the lights made a promise their horses believed. The passengers bought bread and cheese, 2 tins of salmon, and a lamp sleeve for their carriage lantern because the idea pleased them. Before they left, they asked what had brought the town back. "Dusk did," Lydia said, and no one in the room thought that wrong. June smiled in that way that uses no teeth and still gives you plenty. The driver tipped his hat at the row of lit windows like they were ladies bowing. By the next week, 2 wagons had chosen our street for their overnight, because word runs on wheels when it's ready. Even Sheriff Avery's badge picked up a shine again, not from polish but from work. He spent more time speaking than staring, though he still believed strongly in silence. He asked Alma how many students she might have by autumn, which is a way a town considers its next year. Jory hammered a new horseshoe shape into his sign, and the ring it made sounded like what you hope for when you open a door. We had a dust-up only once that summer, not with fists, but with memory. A man from my old trail recognized my shoulders and said my other name in a way that walked the long way around a room. I'd left a job quick 2 winters before when a boss went crooked on pay, and while that was right, it looked wrong from certain angles. He asked if I was steady now. I said I was. He looked at the lamp and said, "You must be." It wasn't absolution, but it was enough to keep building shelf by shelf. We turned the lantern. Sundays, Alma would read a psalm in the doorway, not loud. June would hum a tune that visited and left with the same grace. Oscar split a loaf for anyone who hadn't eaten yet, and the slices steamed in the cool morning like breath from a colt. I fixed the church roof with Avery and Jory, tar on our hands, laughter under our breath like a secret we trusted with the sky. Sometimes, when the last customer had gone and the drawer settled with the soft clack of coins finding their neighbors, June and I would sit on the stoop. She'd bring out 2 cups of coffee no one had paid for, and we'd drink them as if we had. She asked about my old tools, and I told her each by name. The draw knife with the nick at one end, the brace with a handle that creaked the first turn and then stopped. She said she liked how tools don't lie. I asked her what she liked that didn't need polishing. Stitching when the thread finds the groove it was always meant to, she said. And the sound a lamp makes when it decides to behave. We sat in the halo and let the night leave tracks around us, coyote yipping far out, cars of stars sliding quietly. We turned the lantern. Late summer, we held a fair that wasn't a fair. No prizes, no brass band, just tables pulled into the street and a plank set across nail kegs for pies. Children chalked squares on the dust and hopped, falling and getting up like that was the game. Bets brought out 2 old bridles and rubbed them with soap until the leather remembered it was born for service. Someone started a story about the time Mender's Creek sent a wagon load of candles to a flooded county, and another, somebody finished it. Reuben Hatch tried to talk over that day with a fresh scheme, but his voice sounded tinny in a room where bread cooled and a lamp rested on a strong hook. By autumn, he'd taken his paper and his horse down the road to where folks had time to listen and no pie cooling. You don't have to shove a man like that. You let him find his own way out. We turned the lantern. Winter taught us about wicks. Everything teaches you if you're the student kind. Too high and the globe smokes, too low and the light loses its voice. There's a middle that takes patience. Snow came soft and then hard, and the town wore it without complaint, lamplight cutting squares in the blue dark like windows punched in a wall. June knitted a sleeve for her right wrist where the cold bit first. I made a rack so the globes could dry without chipping. On a cold Tuesday, a strange woman stepped in carrying a carpet bag and bearing the look of someone who decided to count on luck twice in a row. She asked if there might be work mending or washing. Lydia told her that we never ask a person's story until they set one down voluntarily, and the woman's spine eased enough for her to breathe. Her name was Celia. By spring, she kept Oscar's books with a pencil that never stuttered. I won't tell you the day June's hand fit mine for good. Some things are private and lovely because they stay behind the light by choice. I will say that when I said, "You never have to ask for silence with me," she said, "I know," and that settled more than either of us could tally. We turned the lantern. There was a night when I woke to rain walking on the roof, and a thought so heavy it could have been mistaken for a man. I went down to check the lamp, as if it needed me more than habit did. Found Lydia already there with the globe off, trimming the wick with a small pair of scissors she kept in a tin. She didn't look up when she asked if I intended to stay another year. "I do," I said, which surprised me because it answered other questions too. "The store will be yours and June's if I go before you," she said, plain as flour. I said we could work out the deed in coin and fair lines before that day, but she shook her head. "Work earned writes its own paper," she said. "I'm not proud of everything I've done, but I'm proud of this. I learned to set wicks right. It's a kind of marriage, a lamp and its keeper, each keeping the other from foolishness." At dusk I learned to pause just long enough to honor the small hinge of the day when men can turn toward one another or away. We turned toward. By the second spring, Mender's Creek had 10 lamps, then 15, each different, each a cousin. Children named them. The Church's 3 sisters, Jory's Red Eye, Oscar's Oven Angel, Pike's Old Star. Travelers said our street looked like a necklace laid down in a hurry. By nightfall, the town returned. Summer brought a pair of fiddlers who slept in the livery and played for bread and the joy of it. They sat up by the lamp on Pike's porch and sawed out a waltz so sweet it made broom handles listen. Ancient couples turned the smallest turns with dignity and approval. Young ones made mistakes quietly and were forgiven. When the tune ended, the air itself seemed to hold a shape for a breath longer, like a barn after a dance. We got ourselves a doctor of sorts when a lapsed army man decided he would rather sew skin than fight. He had a bag that smelled of alcohol, leather, and confidence. His stitches were neat as June's hems. He said the lights at dusk showed him the way home from calls and made him believe we meant to continue. That's what a lamplight does, proves intention. I have not spoken of my wound much because it isn't the kind that bleeds. A man spent years moving, and one day forgot what it felt like to arrive. The night I realized I'd stopped measuring distance in miles and started measuring it in lamps, I sat on the porch step and let that knowledge work through me. June sat beside me without question marks. "Some towns are chores," she said after a while. "This one's a promise." She leaned her shoulder against mine the way people shore up posts. Across the street, Alma's candles shivered and then steadied, which I took as a sign of approval. We turned the lantern. You can call this sentimental if you like. I've been called worse for less. But if you ever stood in a place that had given up the habit of itself, and then watched it try on its old coat and find it still fit, you'd talk as I do. A town is not wood and nails and plats. It's the keeping of simple hours together, the agreement to be lit for each other when the sun steps away. By nightfall, we kept our side of the bargain. When the rail finally laid a spur closer, we didn't run to greet it or spit in its direction. We simply sent a delegation of 2 to buy oil, fare, and bread flour at a cheaper price and a handful of sturdy lampwicks that we could trust. We grew by inches so slow the inches didn't know they were growth. Dust still came and wind still bossed, and yet. One late autumn evening, a letter came from Dustford with a seal as blue as a good bruise. It had Reuben Hatch's name on the fold, and inside it said he'd sold the big idea to a man with deeper pockets and a heart narrower than an axe wedge. We placed the letter under the leg of the short table that wobbled, and it did good service there. We turned the lantern. Years do what years do. Babies were born, and men buried, and women too, because fairness doesn't always look kind. But the lamps kept, and children who had been children learned to trim wicks like their elders, and new names went into the ledger that had once recorded only credit and courage. The street learned the art of bearing its own weather. On the day Lydia Pike took to her bed, she called for her scissors and her book. She cut a small corner of the ledger's last page and pressed it into my palm like a certificate written in some older language. "Keep dusk honest," she said. "Eyes bright as coins in a hand you trust." When she left, we put the lamp on the counter and sat in the quiet, letting habit walk in first. We didn't make speeches. We baked bread and shared it, and swept the boards where her steps had worn the grain to a shine. June tied her apron with Lydia's knot. The next evening, we lit the lamp early by a minute and let it speak the rest. We turned the lantern. There were rough days after, because grief is a kind of weather that doesn't ask for your vote. But grief taught us which lamps flickered first and who needed a hand at the hook, and so it served too. Celia balanced the books and said the oil would stretch if we didn't fear it. Fear, she said, is a bad accountant. We listened, and the numbers proved it true. I kept building shelves, a counter, a little bench by the window where June could stitch and watch the street choose to keep being itself. Sometimes a stranger came in wide-eyed and said, "I heard there was a town that lights itself back to life each dusk." We'd nod and sell them pins or pie and send them on their way with the feeling that stories work when hands do. By nightfall, the town returned. I'm telling you all this plainly because fancy would be a lie. What we did wasn't a miracle, it was a custom. Customs are just promises that have been kept enough times to wear grooves. We turned the lantern. If you stayed through, thank you for sitting the way good neighbors sit, present and unhurried. If you feel like sharing a small memory of a light that steadied you, a porch lamp, a window's glow, a hand, leave it by the fire here when you're ready. The telling keeps us in practice. For more quiet stories like this, there's a Campfire confession circle where dusk keeps its word. You can find it anytime you need company. Travel easy and turn the lantern when dusk asks politely.